It was a simple question, tossed out over dinner as casually as if she were asking about the weather. But it wasn't casual, not even close. "Mike," Rachel said, her voice barely louder than the clink of her fork against the plate. "How would you feel about an open marriage?" I froze mid-bite, my hand gripping the fork like it might fly out of my grasp. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe she'd said open bar or open garage. But her eyes, cautious and unblinking, told me I'd heard her loud and clear. "Come again?" I asked, forcing a calmness I didn't feel. She exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding it in for weeks. "I've been reading about it. You know, how some couples say it helps their marriage. Makes them stronger. Happier." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the woman I'd loved for 12 years, the mother of my 2 kids, my partner in every sense of the word, until now. "Stronger?" I echoed, my voice tinged with disbelief. "Stronger how?" Rachel twisted her napkin, avoiding my eyes. "It's not that I'm unhappy. I just think it could be healthy. To explore. To explore." My stomach churned, the spaghetti suddenly tasting like cardboard. I wasn't sure whether to laugh, scream, or walk out. I did none of those things. Instead, I studied her face, looking for cracks in the mask. Was she nervous? Guilty? Excited? It was a cocktail of all three, and the realization hit me like a brick. She wasn't just curious, she'd already thought this through. Maybe more. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I played along, nodding and asking questions, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop replaying her words, dissecting every nuance of her tone. By the time we cleared the table, I felt like I'd been sucker-punched by my own wife. Later that night, as she lay beside me, scrolling through her phone, I stared at the ceiling. "You weren't just asking hypothetically, were you?" I finally said, breaking the silence. Her fingers paused on the screen. She didn't look at me. "I'm just saying, maybe we've been in a routine too long. Wouldn't it be nice to, I don't know, inject some excitement?" Excitement. That word made my blood run cold. I turned my head to look at her, my heart pounding. "Rachel, is there someone else?" Her reaction was immediate. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide, almost offended. "What? No. Of course not." But her protest came too fast, too forcefully. And the way she quickly rolled over, turning her back to me, only deepened my suspicion. She didn't touch me that night. Neither of us slept. By the next morning, I was running on fumes and paranoia. Something didn't add up. Rachel was affectionate, sure, but it felt forced. Over the next few days, I noticed the smallest things: her phone always flipped screen down, the hushed tones when she answered texts, the unexplained absences that were suddenly popping up in her routine. Then came Friday. Rachel had her usual book club that night. She'd been part of it for years, meeting with the same group of women to discuss whatever novel they were reading. Normally, I didn't give it a second thought. But this time, as she came down the stairs in a new dress and heels, her hair freshly styled, a knot formed in my stomach. "You're all dressed up for book club," I said, my voice deliberately casual. She faltered for the briefest moment, smoothing the fabric of her dress. "It's at Jean's place. She's a little fancier, you know." I nodded, but inside, alarms were blaring. Rachel wasn't the type to dress up for Jean or anyone else at book club. And she'd never worn that perfume except on special occasions, anniversaries, weddings, dates with me. "Have fun," I said as she kissed my cheek and walked out the door. My smile stayed in place until the sound of her car disappeared down the street. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced the living room, my thoughts racing. What if I was overreacting? What if I was reading too much into a harmless suggestion? But deep down, I knew better. At 9:30 p.m., curiosity got the better of me. I picked up my phone and opened the location-sharing app we'd installed years ago when the kids were young. Rachel didn't know I still had access. She thought I'd deleted it. My hands trembled as I pulled up her location. My stomach dropped when I saw the dot on the map, not at Jean's house, not even in the neighborhood. She was at the Avalon Hotel, a swanky place on the other side of town. For a moment, I stared at the screen, my heart thudding so loudly I thought it might burst. I could have called her right then, demanded answers. But something held me back. I needed more. More proof. More clarity. More truth. That's when I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. If Rachel was at the Avalon Hotel, I needed to see for myself. The drive to the Avalon Hotel felt like I was caught in some slow-motion nightmare. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they ever had, the leather cool against my sweaty palms. Thoughts spiraled out of control. What if she really was at a book club? What if this was some innocent misunderstanding? But the knot in my gut told me otherwise. Rachel wasn't the same lately. I'd brushed off the signs because, frankly, I never thought she'd stray. She was my wife, my partner, the woman I'd built my life around. But now? Now I was pulling into the dimly lit parking lot of a place where no book club in the world would ever meet. The Avalon was a boutique hotel, the kind of place couples came for anniversaries or stolen moments. Its glowing glass windows and ivy-covered walls looked almost romantic. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the front entrance. People came and went, business types in tailored suits, women in cocktail dresses, the occasional couple holding hands. None of them was Rachel. I glanced at her location again on my phone. Still here. Floor 3. Room 314. I had options. I could march in there, ask the concierge for the room number, and demand answers. Or I could wait. Waiting felt safer, less humiliating, less public. So, I sank deeper into my seat and waited. 10:15 p.m. A sleek black car pulled into the lot and parked 2 spaces down. The man who stepped out was tall, maybe mid-40s, dressed sharply in a tailored suit. He checked his reflection in the car window, adjusted his tie, and ran a hand through his thick, dark hair. I couldn't be sure, but something about him screamed confidence, too much of it, in fact. I watched as he strolled into the hotel lobby like he owned the place, his phone clutched tightly in one hand. There was no hesitation in his step, no uncertainty. He wasn't checking in for the night. He was meeting someone. My stomach churned. 10:30 p.m. I just about talked myself into storming inside when the automatic doors slid open. A woman stepped out. Even from across the parking lot, I recognized her instantly, Rachel. Her hair, normally tied back in a loose ponytail or messy bun, cascaded in perfect waves over her shoulders. The dress she'd worn out the door earlier now seemed even more striking under the soft glow of the parking lot lights. She was smiling, her cheeks flushed like she'd just heard a good joke, or a sweet nothing. And then he followed her. The man in the suit. They didn't hold hands, didn't touch. But there was an intimacy in the way they stood together, close enough for her to lean in and whisper something that made him laugh. My world tilted on its axis. I grabbed my phone, snapping a photo through the windshield. My fingers trembled as I zoomed in, the image grainy but clear enough. Rachel's face. His face. Side by side. I should have gotten out of the car, should have confronted them right then and there. But something stopped me, a mix of disbelief, heartbreak, and the fear of what she might say if I did. Instead, I stayed rooted to my seat, watching as they walked to his car. She climbed into the passenger seat like she'd done it 100 times before. They didn't kiss, but they didn't need to. Everything about the scene screamed betrayal. 11 p.m. I trailed them from a distance as they left the lot. I kept my headlights off and stayed far enough back that they wouldn't notice. They drove toward the quieter part of town, where neighborhoods gave way to secluded streets lined with trees. Eventually, his car pulled into the driveway of a modest, two-story house. The lights inside flicked on, and they disappeared behind the door. I parked a few houses down, my heart racing as I debated what to do next. Confront them here? Call her? Go home and pretend this wasn't happening? 11:30 p.m. I couldn't just sit there anymore. I left my car, walking slowly toward the house. My steps felt heavy, my legs like lead. As I approached, I noticed the curtains weren't fully drawn in the living room. I shouldn't have looked, but I couldn't stop myself. Peering through the gap, I saw Rachel and the man seated on a couch. She leaned forward, her body language relaxed, as he poured wine into 2 glasses. They clinked them together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I stumbled back to my car, my chest tight with anger and disbelief. I didn't confront her, not yet. But I'd seen enough. She wasn't just curious about an open marriage. She was already in one, whether I'd agreed to it or not. As I sat in my car, staring at the house, one thing became crystal clear: Rachel was a stranger to me now. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in the car outside that stranger's house for hours, running through every possible scenario. My mind alternated between searing anger and crushing sadness, punctuated by flashes of disbelief. How had it come to this? What had I missed? By the time the first light of dawn crept over the rooftops, I made my decision. I wouldn't confront Rachel, not yet. I needed more than what I'd seen through the window. I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. Not for anyone else, but for me. I needed to know I wasn't crazy, that the woman I'd shared my life with had truly crossed the line. Rachel woke up like it was any other day. She hummed in the kitchen while brewing her coffee, her face relaxed, her smile easy. Watching her made my stomach turn. "Did you have fun at book club?" I asked, pretending to be engrossed in the news playing on the TV. She paused mid-pour, then nodded. "Yeah, it was nice. We didn't get much reading done, though. Too much wine and gossip," she added with a light laugh. Lying came so naturally to her. It was terrifying. After she left for work, I started digging. The first stop was our shared phone bill. Rachel and I weren't the type to snoop through each other's calls and texts, but this wasn't the time for trust or privacy. As I scrolled through her call log, one number stood out, repeated over and over. It wasn't saved under a name, just the digits. My stomach twisted as I punched the number into a reverse lookup site. Mark L. Sanders. The name was unfamiliar, but it was all I needed to confirm my suspicions. A quick search pulled up his social media profile, a mid-level executive at some financial firm downtown. Married. 2 kids. And judging by the smug grin on his profile photo, a guy who probably thought he was untouchable. My next move was trickier. Rachel's phone rarely left her side, but I knew she had a bad habit of leaving it unlocked when she was in the shower. That night, I waited. Sure enough, she placed her phone on the nightstand before heading to the bathroom. My hands shook as I picked it up. Scrolling through her texts, I found what I was looking for. Messages from Mark. Some were innocuous, the kind of thing you might send a coworker: "Lunch tomorrow," or "That meeting was brutal." But others? They left no room for doubt. "Mark, can't stop thinking about last night. You were incredible. Rachel, you make me feel so alive. I don't want it to end. Mark, Friday again? Same place? Rachel, I'll be there. I can't wait. 2 hearts. My heart pounded as I took screenshots of the messages and sent them to my email. My mind screamed at me to confront her, to demand an explanation, but I bit it back. I still wasn't ready. Not yet. On Friday, Rachel told me she'd be working late. I didn't even flinch when she said it, just nodded like the oblivious husband she probably thought I was. But when her car pulled out of the driveway that evening, I was right behind her. She drove across town, straight to the Avalon Hotel. I parked a block away and watched as she stepped out of her car, looking effortlessly elegant in another dress I hadn't seen in years. She didn't hesitate as she walked inside. I waited 15 minutes before following. The lobby was quiet, the front desk manned by a young clerk who barely looked up from his computer. "Excuse me," I said, sliding a folded $20 across the counter. "I'm supposed to meet my wife, Rachel Thompson, but I think I forgot her room number. Can you help me out?" The clerk eyed the bill, then shrugged. "Room 305. I took the elevator up, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't have a plan. What could I say or do that would make this moment any less devastating? When I reached the door, I stood there for what felt like an eternity. I could hear muffled voices, her voice, and his deeper tone. They were laughing, carefree and easy. My fingers hovered over the handle, but I didn't turn it. Instead, I pulled out my phone, recording the sounds for a few seconds. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof. I didn't knock. I didn't barge in. I walked away. Back home, Rachel returned late, her face glowing. She kissed me on the cheek and murmured something about being exhausted. I didn't say a word. But when she went to bed, I opened my laptop and began assembling everything. The texts, the recordings, the photos, it all came together like pieces of a puzzle I wished I didn't have to solve. Rachel had made her choice. She thought she could have it both ways, her cozy, stable life with me and her thrilling, secret romance with Mark. But she was about to find out how wrong she was. As I stared at the folder of evidence, my anger hardened into resolve. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make her see the full weight of what she'd done. Saturday morning came like the calm before a storm. Rachel moved around the kitchen as if nothing had changed, humming as she prepped coffee and scrambled eggs. Meanwhile, I sat at the dining table, my hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't sipped from, watching her like a stranger. The folder of evidence I'd compiled sat on the laptop in my office, waiting for its moment. I'd spent the night crafting my plan, replaying every scenario. Would she deny it? Beg? Turn it on me? The truth was, I didn't know this Rachel, this version of her who could lie so easily, cheat so casually. "Mike, you okay?" she asked, her voice warm, familiar. It made my skin crawl. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Just tired. Been a long week." She bought it. Of course she did. I'd always been the steady one, the man she could rely on. But that ended today. By mid-afternoon, Rachel announced she was heading out to run errands. "Want me to pick anything up?" she asked, slipping on her coat. I shook my head, barely looking up from my phone. "Nah, I'm good. Have fun." The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I got to work. First, I printed the screenshots of her texts with Mark and slipped them into an envelope. Then I set up my laptop in the living room, where I'd uploaded the audio recording from outside room 305. Finally, I placed a single sticky note on the envelope, scribbled with one word, "Why?" By the time Rachel got home, the house was quiet. I was seated on the couch, the envelope and laptop on the coffee table in front of me. She walked in, carrying a bag of groceries, her expression shifting as she saw me. "Hey, everything okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "Sit down," I said, my tone flat. Her smile faltered. "What's going on?" Sit, I repeated, gesturing to the chair opposite me. She hesitated but complied, setting the groceries aside. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to me. "What's this about?" she asked, a nervous laugh escaping her. "Open it." Rachel's fingers trembled as she picked up the envelope. She slid out the contents, her face draining of color as her eyes scanned the texts. "Mike," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't," I cut her off, pointing to the laptop. "Press play." She hesitated, her hand hovering over the trackpad. When the recording began, the color in her cheeks faded completely. Her voice and marks, muffled but unmistakable, filled the room. She slammed the laptop shut. "I can explain." I barked a laugh, sharp and humorless. "Explain? What's there to explain, Rachel? You lied to me. You cheated. You went behind my back and dragged our marriage through the mud. What part of that needs explaining?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. "Not this time. I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear, it started as just, harmless flirting. I didn't think it would go this far." "But it did," I said coldly. "And now what? You thought you could have your fun and I'd just sit here playing the clueless husband?" I was confused, she cried, the tears spilling over now. "Things haven't been the same between us. I felt neglected, unappreciated. And Mark, he made me feel." "Don't," I snapped, my voice rising. "Don't you dare try to make this about me. I've been here, Rachel. I've been loyal. And if you had a problem, you could have talked to me. But instead, you ran straight to him. You made your choice." Rachel collapsed into sobs, burying her face in her hands. "I was stupid, okay? I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything, Mark didn't mean anything." I stood, towering over her. "Don't insult me by pretending this was meaningless. You dressed up for him. You lied to my face. You planned your little dates. And now, you expect me to believe it didn't mean anything? You threw away 12 years for a man who doesn't even respect his own marriage." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Please, Mike. Don't do this. Don't throw us away. I'll end it, I already have. I'll do anything to make it right. Please don't leave me." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't penetrate the wall I'd built around my heart. "I didn't throw us away, Rachel," I said, my voice low and steady. "You did. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences." I grabbed the suitcase I'd packed that morning and slung it over my shoulder. Rachel froze, her eyes wide with panic. "Wait, where are you going?" she asked, scrambling to her feet. "To figure out what's next," I replied, moving toward the door. "Mike, please," she shouted, rushing after me. She grabbed my arm, but I shook her off. "You should have thought about this before," I said, opening the door. "Maybe Mark can give you the answers you're looking for." And with that, I walked out, her sobs echoing behind me. I thought leaving would feel like freedom. But as I drove aimlessly through town, the weight of it all bore down on me. My anger had simmered into something colder, a deep, hollow ache. Rachel's betrayal wasn't just about another man, it was the shattering of trust, the undoing of a life we'd built together. After a while, I pulled into a motel parking lot, the neon vacancy sign flickering overhead. I checked in, dropped my bag on the floor, and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, texts, missed calls, voicemails, all from Rachel. I ignored every one of them. By morning, I was ready to take the next steps. I contacted a lawyer, explained the situation, and began the process of filing for divorce. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart. But as I signed off on the preliminary paperwork, I told myself it was the only way forward. Still, something didn't sit right. Mark. I hadn't told Rachel yet, but I'd found his wife's social media profile during my late-night digging spree. Jessica Sanders. Her smiling face stared back at me from her page, surrounded by 2 young kids and a Labrador. She deserved to know. I debated for hours. Was it my place to blow up her life the way Rachel had blown up mine? In the end, I decided it wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. That afternoon, I found myself sitting in the motel parking lot, phone in hand. My thumb hovered over the call button for Jessica's number. I'd found it in a public directory, thank God for small-town nosiness. When I finally pressed it, my heart pounded in my chest. Hello? Her voice was bright, cheerful. Hi, Jessica. My name's Mike Thompson. This is going to sound strange, but I think we need to talk. It's about your husband, Mark. There was a pause. What about Mark? I took a deep breath. I think he's been having an affair. With my wife, Rachel. Her silence stretched on so long I thought she'd hung up. But then, her voice returned, shaky and small. Are you sure? I have proof, I said, my tone softening. Texts. Photos. Even audio. I can send them to you if you want. Jessica exhaled sharply. Yes. Please. Send it all. I did, and then I waited. The next few minutes felt like hours, the knot in my stomach tightening with every second. Finally, her reply came, not a call, but a text. Can we meet? There's something you need to know, too. We met at a coffee shop on the edge of town. Jessica was beautiful in a down-to-earth way, her face drawn and pale, like she hadn't slept in days. She greeted me with a weak smile, clutching a folder in her hands. Thanks for coming, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry about all of this, I said, gesturing to the folder. I know it's a lot to process. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. It's more than that. She hesitated, then slid the folder across the table to me. You need to see this. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat as I scanned the contents. Emails, text logs, receipts, all documenting not just Mark's affair with Rachel, but with several other women. He's been doing this for years, Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. Rachel isn't the first. She's not even the third. I found out 6 months ago but didn't have the courage to leave. I don't know what I thought. The room spun around me. Rachel had thrown away our life for this? For a man who treated her like just another conquest? Jessica's expression shifted, her lips tightening as if she were holding something back. There's one more thing, she said, her voice low. Something I think you should know. What is it? Her hands trembled as she pushed another document toward me. Mark's been talking about Rachel. A lot. He's been telling people that he's planning to leave me for her. That she's the one. My stomach dropped. No. She wouldn't. Jessica nodded grimly. I didn't want to believe it either. But there's more. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. He's convinced Rachel feels the same way. That she's going to leave you, too. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. Was this Rachel's plan all along? To use Mark as an escape hatch from our marriage? Jessica reached out, placing a hand on mine. Listen, Mike. I've been through hell with Mark. I know what kind of man he is. But I think Rachel might be in over her head. What do you mean? She hesitated, then leaned closer. Mark doesn't just cheat. He manipulates. He lies. He uses women until they're completely dependent on him, emotionally or financially, and then he discards them. I don't think Rachel knows what she's gotten herself into. The realization hit me like a freight train. Rachel's betrayal was still unforgivable, but if Jessica was right, then Mark wasn't just a cheater. He was a predator. And Rachel might have been his next victim. As I drove away from the coffee shop, Jessica's words echoed in my mind. My anger toward Rachel hadn't faded, but it had twisted into something else, an unsettling mix of pity and confusion. She'd made her choices, yes. But now, I had a choice to make, too. Did I walk away and let her deal with the fallout of her actions? Or did I confront the man who had shattered both of our lives? I spent the night replaying Jessica's words over and over in my mind. Rachel wasn't innocent, far from it. But if Mark was the kind of man Jessica described, then her betrayal was far more complicated than I'd initially thought. That didn't mean I forgave her. It just meant I couldn't walk away without seeing this through. I needed to confront Mark. Not for Rachel's sake, at least, that's what I told myself, but because I refused to let someone like him waltz away unscathed. Mark's office was in the heart of downtown, a sleek glass building that reeked of money and self-importance. I parked across the street, staring up at the mirrored facade. I had no appointment, no plan, just a simmering rage and a folder of evidence under my arm. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I strode in. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her fingers flying over her keyboard. "No," I said, my voice sharp. "But he'll want to see me." "Sir, I can't." "Tell him it's Mike Thompson. I'm sure he'll understand." Something in my tone must have spooked her because she picked up the phone and whispered into the receiver. A moment later, she nodded. "Mr. Sanders will see you. Conference room on the 3rd floor." I didn't wait for directions. Mark was seated at the head of a polished oak conference table, a smug smile plastered on his face. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, and his handshake was firm when I refused to take the seat he offered. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You must be Rachel's husband. Mike, right?" Hearing him say her name made my blood boil. I dropped the folder onto the table, the contents spilling out, photos, screenshots, and the printed text messages. His smile faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly. "I take it this isn't a friendly visit." I leaned in, my fists braced against the table. "You've been screwing my wife, Sanders. But we're not here to talk about that." He raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "Oh? Then what is this about?" "Jessica," I said, watching his reaction closely. That got him. His jaw tightened ever so slightly, a flicker of annoyance flashing in his eyes. "She told me everything," I continued, my voice low and cold. "Not just about Rachel, but about the others. About your little habit of collecting women, using them, then tossing them aside when you're done." Mark's smile returned, but it was sharper now, like a blade. "I see Jessica's been running her mouth. I suppose she left out the part where she begged me not to leave her?" "You can try to spin this however you want," I said, my voice rising. "But the game's over. You're not some mastermind pulling strings in the shadows. You're just a coward who preys on people too blind to see through your bullsh*t. His expression hardened. "Is that what you think? That I preyed on your wife?" "Newsflash, Mike, Rachel came to me. She wanted out of your dull little life, and I gave her something you couldn't." The words hit like a slap, but I refused to let him see it. "You're right," I said. "She made her choices. And now I'm making mine." I reached into my pocket, pulling out a thumb drive. "This is everything. The texts, the photos, the recording from the Avalon Hotel." I tossed it onto the table. "You're going to explain all this to Jessica. You're going to tell her the truth, and then you're going to get the hell out of her life. If you don't, I'll make sure every client in this building sees what kind of man you really are. Mark's face darkened, the cocky facade slipping. You're bluffing. Try me, I said, my voice like steel. 2 days later, I got a text from Jessica, he's gone. He signed the divorce papers and moved out this morning. Thank you. I stared at the screen, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over me. One chapter had closed, but another was still hanging open. That evening, Rachel showed up at my motel unannounced. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She stood in the doorway, clutching her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. Mike, she said, her voice trembling. Can we talk? I stepped aside, letting her in. She sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands. I heard about Mark, she began, her voice barely audible. Jessica called me. She told me everything. I folded my arms, leaning against the wall. And? Rachel's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. I was an idiot, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I fell for his lies. I thought he cared about me, but I was just another name on his list. I don't know what I was thinking. You weren't, I said flatly. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I was stupid and selfish, and I've destroyed the only thing that ever mattered to me. Please, Mike. I'll do anything to fix this. Just, don't leave me. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her back and pretend this nightmare had never happened. But the other part, the part that had sat outside the Avalon Hotel and listened to her laugh with another man, knew better. Rachel, I said finally, my voice steady. You didn't just break my trust. You burned it to the ground. And I don't know if it can ever be rebuilt. Rachel stared at me, her face streaked with tears. She looked so small in that moment, her usual confidence stripped away. But even as she begged, all I could feel was the ache of betrayal. Her words might have been sincere, but they didn't erase what she'd done. Mike, she said again, her voice breaking. Please. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but I love you. I've always loved you. Can't we just try to fix this? I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the small motel room. Love? I said, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. You love me, but you still slept with Mark? Lied to me for months? Do you even hear yourself? She flinched like I'd struck her. It wasn't like that. I was confused. I thought we'd lost our spark, and he made me feel. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't tell me he made you feel special. That's not love, Rachel. That's ego. That's selfishness. She opened her mouth to argue but closed it again, her shoulders slumping. For a moment, the room was silent, save for her quiet sobs. I gave you everything, I said, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. I was here for you, through every high and every low. When you wanted to go back to school? I worked double shifts to make it happen. When the kids were sick? I took days off to stay home so you wouldn't miss meetings. Hell, I even supported you when you said you needed space after your mom died. And this is how you repay me? I know, she whispered, her face buried in her hands. I know, Mike. I messed up. I let myself believe. I don't know what I believed. But I swear, it's over. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why I wasn't enough, why our life wasn't enough. But deep down, I already knew the answer. It wasn't about me. It never had been. Rachel's choices weren't some reflection of my failures, they were a reflection of hers. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. What do you want me to do, Mike? I'll leave my job. I'll go to therapy. I'll I'll do anything. Just don't walk away. I shook my head slowly. Do you even hear yourself? You didn't just hurt me, Rachel. You destroyed us. And now, after all of it, you want me to be the one to fix it? To carry the weight of what you've done? Her lower lip quivered. No. That's not what I'm asking. Isn't it? I shot back, my voice rising. You're asking me to forgive the unforgivable. To forget that while I was sitting at home, wondering why things felt off, you were at a hotel with another man. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? She broke into fresh sobs, her hands clutching the edge of the bed like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I can't lose you, Mike. I can't. Please. I turned away, my chest tight with emotion I didn't want to feel. My phone buzzed, breaking the tension. I pulled it from my pocket, frowning at the unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something made me swipe to answer. Hello? Mike? It was Jessica. Her voice was calm, but there was an urgency beneath it. Jessica? What's going on? I thought you should know, she said, pausing. Mark's not going quietly. He's been calling Rachel. A lot. I think he's trying to reel her back in. I froze, my gaze snapping to Rachel. She was watching me, her face pale. I haven't answered, Rachel blurted out, as if reading my mind. I swear, Mike. I blocked his number. I want nothing to do with him. But her words weren't enough. My mind reeled. Had Mark planted himself so deeply into Rachel's life that even now, even after everything, he still had a hold on her? I ended the call with Jessica, my hands shaking. Rachel stood, closing the distance between us. Mike, I'm telling the truth. He's out of my life. I don't care about him, I only care about you. Then why? I asked, my voice barely audible. Why did you choose him in the first place? She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. And in that moment, I realized the truth, she didn't have an answer. Not one that would ever make sense. I don't know, she finally whispered. And that was it. The final nail in the coffin. I can't do this, I said, stepping back. Her face crumpled, the reality of my words sinking in. Mike, please. We can. No, I interrupted. We can't. You made your choice, Rachel. And now I'm making mine. I grabbed my suitcase, my chest heavy but resolute. She didn't try to stop me this time. She just stood there, tears streaming silently down her face. I'll have my lawyer contact you, I said, my voice hollow. Goodbye, Rachel. And with that, I walked out the door. It's been 6 months since that night. The divorce is final, and I've started to rebuild. It's not easy, letting go of the life we had is like grieving a death. But day by day, I'm finding my footing. Jessica and I stay in touch, though we've both agreed to keep it platonic. She's rebuilding too, carving out a new life for her and her kids. As for Rachel? I hear through mutual friends that she's moved out of town. Whether she's with Mark or not, I don't know, and I don't care. All I know is this, betrayal may break you, but it doesn't define you. It took losing everything to find myself again. And this time, I'm not looking back.